I'm really excited to talk to you about some ABCs of teaching. Uh, Hopefully, this is helpful for anyone who's interested in teaching, or particularly people who are new to teaching. So the title for the talk actually comes from this book, The ABCs of How to Learn. And this is, I think, just like a super digestible summary of a lot of what we know across education and psychology and social sciences about the processes of learning. So I highly recommend this to anyone. And it's like a super easy skim, too, based around the ABCs sort of theme. So I'm going to be inspired by that theme and share some tips with you for what I think can be really helpful for helping students learn in the classroom. Okay, the first piece is you need to come into your classroom with the assumption that all students can learn. Every student needs that belief. Like, imagine you think that ability is innate and you've either got it or you don't. As a student, why would you even try if you think an ability is innate, right? Like, we want our students to be challenged, and the extent to which they perceive challenge as indicating they don't belong or can never do it, they're toast. So you need to be able to bring that energy that you believe that all students can learn. Learning is hard. We shouldn't expect students to get things right the first time, and we should expect students to understand something and then to lose it a little bit and get some things wrong. Like, that's a normal part of learning. Okay, and really reinforcing with students that this stuff takes practice and this stuff takes time. Okay, number 2, your body language in the class is really important. The extent to which your students know that you want to be there, the extent to which your students are like, yeah, my instructor is happy to be teaching me these things, I think is really important to the student's experience. Some ways of communicating that you do want to be there and are committed to their learning is to move around a little bit in the classroom. That energy can sometimes be helpful for students. A second piece is just smiling. Do you know what I mean? The extent to which students, as they're walking into class or as you are teaching them things, you are smiling can be super helpful. One other tip about body language is you want to point at things and not in directions. So say I wanted to draw your attention to the x-axis on a graph. If instead of saying x-axis, I just point to the x-axis on the slides behind me, likely you won't be able to see what I'm pointing to. So there's where a laser pointer or the cursor on your computer is really helpful. But I think I see a lot of people that will gesture to the screen without actually helping draw students to attention to a specific thing. Okay, there are multiple channels of information. So I've got links to the slides that have all of my notes and the individual elements. But what I find is that if I've got a lot of content on the screen while I'm talking, students will sometimes like look around me and try like I'm blocking the slides for them, maybe not recognizing that I want them to be focused on what I'm saying and not just on the slides. So what I do in my notes is I have what I want students to be looking at and paying attention to on the screen. And that might be best supported in the end with, a paragraph of text or 6 bullets. And what I do is I put that on this next slide after that. I can use it to make sure that I said all the things that I wanted to say. People always give you the advice like, oh, don't just think of PowerPoint as your notes. But as long as I have on the screen what I want students to pay attention to, I can click to the next slide that has my bullets of what I wanted to hit. I can see I missed something, and I can go back to the previous slide and explain that. Maybe people might judge that behavior, but I think it helps me make sure that I hit the important content, and it helps me ensure that when students leave the class, they know what I was trying to communicate on that slide. Okay, this one is a little more controversial, but the extent to which students are using phones or laptops, they're less likely to be paying attention to you. So I want to encourage you to discourage or forbid use of cell phones and laptops in class. And this is a tricky thing, but certainly I know at conferences I think that I'm multitasking and I'm checking my email, but really I'm not paying attention to the presenter. And the extent to which we want students to be really engaged and challenged and thinking during class, we don't want those external devices. And there's some pretty good research on it too that shows that students who use screens during class learn less and retain less, and that the people sort of behind them that can also see their screen, they also learn less and retain less. Okay, so I just start every morning's class saying, okay, welcome folks, and remember, put away your laptops and cell phones, just put those right in your backpack. And I just try and make a habit of it. Okay, assessment. So trying to recall information is actually really helpful for learning. So I think culturally we sometimes like poo-poo assessment, do you know what I mean? Like tests, are so terrible. But it's like, oh, actually the act of testing ourselves is really helpful for learning. That's why flashcards are actually really effective. If I just read the definitions of some words, I'm not going to learn anything. But if I look at only the word and try and come up with the definition, or only definition and try and come up with a word, that is helpful for our learning. Students often will overestimate their understanding. And so if I just read the definition, like a word and a definition in a list, I might be like, yeah, I totally know that. But yeah, I probably don't actually totally know that. And so the extent to which we can force our students to be engaged in testing themselves, not just sort of reviewing and assuming that they know it, can be super helpful. I think it's really helpful to give students lots of opportunities to assess their own learning. So, for example, the way I structure lecture is I have 5 to 10 minutes of lecture and then a problem or two that students should be able to do based upon that last chunk of lecture. And that allows me and them to check in on how that learning went. It doesn't mean that they're going to retain it for forever based upon that interaction and based upon solving that problem, but it gives me a helpful gauge to see how that went and for them to see how much of that they understood. It can get them to ask better questions, etc. Okay, the other one that I do is I ask students thumbs up, if that made sense, thumbs down, not so much. And the thing that I have found is that, I think of it as sort of like 3 options, and students have added like a 4th option, which was like, Colleen, that was so bad, oh my gosh. And the extent to which I can get that feedback from students is just helping me be a better teacher. Like, I am not a perfect teacher, and if a student tells me that they think I'm the worst teacher in the world, they likely have feedback that can help me improve. The thing that would really hurt me, because it's tied to my core identity, is this idea that I care about my students and their learning. And if a student said that they thought I didn't care about them or their learning, that would really hit me hard. But I need to be open to their feedback so that I can improve. And so I need to accept the idea that my teaching might not work for them, and by having them tell me how, I might be able to improve my instruction. Okay, it is super important as a faculty member to bound how much time you're spending on things. I think that this can be anxiety producing because we really just want to do our best, and I think academia selects for people who really, really, really want to do our best, but literally everything can always be better. And so we have to set limits on how much time we spend. So something that I do is I will block out time in my calendar for how long I'm going to be able to prep for that thing. I try and make sure that I have a little bit of wiggle room, but really holding myself to a fixed amount of time. If I am teaching a class for the first time, then maybe that for every lecture I'm prepping 4 or 5 hours. That might not be how much time you can spend on it, but maybe that's what I'm doing. But within that 4 or 5 hours, I still bound individual tasks so that I don't spend 5 hours on something small. I'm trying to make a first pass, and that first pass I can spend 45 minutes, and maybe I finish it in an hour. Do you know what I mean? In each chunk I'm bounding. After I've taught a class a bunch of times, I can allocate, maybe an hour of prep. I try and set that time the day before. so that I have a little bit more wiggle room and I'm a little bit less like adrenaline-filled panic if I do it the hour before class. Okay, last piece about bounding things. My first semester, my office hours, which were scheduled, for a few hours a week, would just never end. Say they would start at 3, they would just end when I left campus. And luckily I was in a carpool, so there were some fixed bounds there. But setting those boundaries with students was really hard for me, and being like, oh, dear lovely students that I love helping, and I get so much emotional value out of office hours. Please get out of my office. And I still don't have those skills of kicking students out of my office. And so what I do is I hold my office hours in public spaces. I think this is important because it allows more students to come to the office hours who might not feel comfortable coming and knocking on my door and coming into sort of my space. So I'll hold them in a lab or in a coffee shop on campus. And then students can just be sitting working on their homework, and then whenever they get stuck, they can ask me a question. The key piece about bounds is that allows me to leave office hours when they're over. And I don't have to kick anyone out, and then I'm able to really keep my office hours to be the hours that I already scheduled. Okay, so awesome to be super clear in our teaching. I think that one's like one that you maybe don't need to tell new teachers of like, oh, we want our lectures and our homework assignments to be clear. But there's this new thing called transparent teaching, which has shown differential impact for students of color and for women in STEM classes and for first-generation college students. So those are students without a parent or guardian with a 4-year college degree. So this idea of transparent teaching that has had this positive benefit is focused on being really, really, really explicit. So we're not lowering the cognitive demand for students, but we're going to tell students exactly what we want them to learn, exactly what they should do to learn it, like how should they be studying, when they get started on this homework, what's the first thing that they should do? So that there's not hidden assumptions within our class about what we expect students to be doing. Like, even think, during class, I expect students to be taking notes. I expect students to be noting when they don't understand something, not just trying to copy ideas down, but really reflecting and monitoring. And so if I expect that, and I think that that's how to be successful in my class, I need to tell students that. Okay, active learning is quite the buzzword. It, I think, to some extent, means everything and nothing all at the same time. Some of the research around it treats it as anything that's other than just straight lecture. So if students do anything other than listen, it's active learning, and even that like very coarse description under meta-analyses shows really impressive results where active learning or something other than just lecture is better for students. And again, it has that differential impact for students of color and first-generation college students. And so I think really the responsible thing to do in our teaching is to think about how can we give students opportunity to talk during class, to do some formative assessment where they can test their understanding, reflect, take breaks, etc. I think is really helpful. My strategy in class is to give, like I said, 5 to 10 minutes of lecture and then give students a problem. Even sometimes I will pause class and I'll be like, this was pretty tricky. What I'm going to have you do is in pairs try and explain this to each other. So everybody point at the person that they're going to work with. So this is a silent activity, and it's a little awkward for students, but everybody's kind of looking around to see who's not pointing at anybody. Okay, point at the person that you're going to work with. Okay, once we've found those pairs, then I'll say, okay, the person closest to the chalkboard over here, they are going to try and explain, static methods or whatever to their partner. So really structuring that activity so that students have an opportunity to engage in class with the material and really challenge their understanding. And I think even short activities like that can get students to ask better questions, to recognize things they didn't understand. To get students ready for this on the first day of class, I have, okay, point at the person you're going to talk with, solving this problem. Okay, everybody points, and I say, okay, in 10 seconds, you're going to shout this person's name. And then I just like loudly count down from 10, because they might not know this person. And then everyone at once shouts their name, the other person's name, and it just sets a tone, I think, in my classroom where it's like, you are going to be making noise. This is not a class where you come and you just need to like sit and take notes. You're going to be engaging and talking in this class. That's what I want. And I've realized recently with the point at the person you're going to talk to, I need to do that every class, every problem. Okay, so before I say, okay, go work on this problem, every day I say, and every activity I say, point at the person you're going to work with. Okay, go. And that gets them to talk more. Okay, you should just borrow, steal, copy, literally whatever you can. I think something that's really nice about educators is that we put so much into the things that we create. We're excited for other people to get to use them to help their teaching. And so I think that you'll be surprised how much people are willing to share with you. So drop people an email to see if they'll share their lecture slides with you. Like search the internet to find instructors who are teaching similar courses, reach out to them. A lot of people are going to be, I think, super happy to send you a zip of some PowerPoint files. Like that's really all the work it would take from them, and having a base can be super, super helpful. There's also a bunch of resources in the CS Ed community. So nifty.stanford.edu, they have a bunch of cool homework assignments. Engage-csedu.org is a project of NC WIT, and they have a bunch of different homework assignments as well. And those are vetted based upon the NC WIT promising practices. So they have 9 practices for creating inclusive homework assignments. And so the things in that repository are judged based upon that. There's also peer instruction for CS.org. So peer instruction is a form of active learning where you ask students multiple choice questions. They vote individually, then they get the opportunity to talk in their group of 3 typically, and then as a team they re-vote. And as an instructor, you can use these, with little clickers, you can use the feedback from those votes to help you guide lecture, whole class discussion, and really get a good sense of students' learning. Those questions are really hard to write good multiple choice questions, but peer instructions for CS.org has a ton of resources there. And then acm.org/education, CS 2013-final-report. So the ACM released the 2013 curriculum, and part of what they have in there is exemplars for particular courses, and so that can be another resource for you as you're thinking about teaching a new course. Have you heard of CS Teaching Tips? So we have tips for teaching computer science. It's at csteachingtips.org or on Twitter at csteachingtips. So this project is seeking to document and disseminate effective teaching practices. I've interviewed 150 computer science teachers. We have about 1,300 tips online. We have flyers and posters and more videos. Hopefully you'll check it out. We try and tweet out 3 tips a day so that you're constantly seeing those ideas. I find that sometimes I'll see a tweet from CS Teaching Tips and I'll be like, oh, that's a really good idea. Like, I should do that. And then I click on the tweet that takes me to csteachingtips.org, and it's actually a tip I wrote. Like, not just that I interviewed somebody and wrote it down. It's that I do it in my classroom and decided to add it as a tip. And so I think teaching is so complicated. Like, even when we get in good routines where we're doing a lot of like great practices, it can be hard to sustain those because teaching is so complicated. And if you've got any questions about teaching, send them to us on Twitter or on Facebook or over email. I'm happy to see them there too. Okay, I have one more plug, which is I think like adulting is relatively challenging, and so I have a blog post on medium.com, and it's at Colleen Lewis, and what I have there is I give myself stickers for doing work. So every 45 minutes of work that I do, I give myself a sticker, and you're like, this sounds absurd. But like, I actually don't know how other people get any work done, and so if that even remotely speaks to you, you might check it out. And I've got templates for the star sheets that I use. It's a lot over the top, but hopefully these resources were helpful for you. And I'll definitely share a link to the slides that have all the notes. And you saw those notes slides in there, and I just went past those quickly. Sorry, those weren't long enough to read. But thanks so much.